The phone vibrated at dawn, and the message from County General said a DNA kinship match had been confirmed. Maya stared at the waveform and tasted metal in her mouth. A clerk said, per sealed record, there was a live birth. The word split the room. She remembered white lights, the night she was told her body had failed her. She whispered, "Then what did I grieve all these years?" The message named an adoption case number and a guardian who signed consent. "What?" Victor Hale said, "All decisions were in your best interest." His voice echoed from an old voicemail she never deleted. The city exhaled sirens and wet tires below her window. Coffee went cold as the window fogged with her breath. She said, "Someone stole my life and called it mercy." The clerk said, "We can only release non-identifying details." The silence that followed felt like a verdict. Maya pressed replay until the words turned to static. The waiting room smelled like lemon cleaner and old magazines. Dr. Lila Moreno opened the door and said, "Come in, sit wherever feels steady." Maya sat and watched the clock stall between seconds. She said, "I was told the night was empty, and it wasn't." Lila listened without blinking. Lila said, "Truth arriving late still counts as truth." A sparrow tapped the window and fled. Maya said, "If a child breathed, then someone decided I shouldn't know." Lila said, "Name the wound without naming your worth." The tissue box waited like a dare. Lila said, "Grief is a map when the world lies." Maya held her breath until her ribs hurt, and then she let it go. Jonah met her at a diner where the coffee never quit. He slid into the booth and said, "Tell me fast or tell me real." She pushed the case number across the table. She said, "They said live birth, sealed adoption, consent by a guardian." Jonah said, "Who had that power?" The neon flickered and hummed. She said, "Victor signed something while I couldn't speak." Jonah said, "Then we burned daylight finding paper." A server smiled and poured silence. She said, "What if chasing this kills what's left of me?" Jonah said, "Then I run next to you, not ahead." The coffee steamed like a vow. Victor's office displayed victory like a hobby. He stood behind the desk and said, "You look tired, that usually means impulsive." She laid the printed record between them. She said, "Did you sign consent 12 years ago?" He did not touch the paper. Victor said, "You were not competent and the situation required adults." The word adults soured in the air. She said, "You chose for me," then buried the choice. Victor said, "You're emotional, and memory is unreliable." A clock ticked like distant rain. She said, "Memory didn't forge your name." His smile held like a blade. Night returned like a witness. Maya walked the river path until the city thinned. She said, "If you are out there, I am coming." The words startled a gull from a piling. She remembered lullabies she never sang, and a name she never learned. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Aaron Patel said, "I heard about the record, we should talk." The past tightened like a knot. She said, "I don't need apologies, I need doors to open." The river answered with dark light. She pressed save on the number and kept walking. The county records office hummed like a tired hive, and the ticket screen crawled. Maya said, "I need the adoption docket tied to this case number." The clerk blinked and said, "Portions are sealed by the court." Jonah said, "We're asking for the index only." A copier coughed and jammed. Maya said, "A signature was used to erase me from my own night." The clerk said, "There's a guardian ad litem notation, but the file is offsite." Jonah said, "Offsite where, and who authorized the transfer?" The clerk checked a screen and frowned. The clock ticked louder than traffic. Maya said, "Please print the chain of custody log." The clerk said, "I can print what the law allows." Paper spat out a page that looked like smoke. Lila's office breathed with plants and the hush of a small fountain. Lila said, "Today we write what cannot yet be sent." Maya stared at the blank page until it stared back. Maya said, "Letters are graves when no one reads them." Lila said, "Letters are bridges, even when the far bank is fog. A storm rolled its knuckles across the window. Maya said, "What if the child hates the sound of my name?" Lila said, "Name your truth, not your prophecy." The pen touched paper and shivered. Maya said, "I missed the first breath and the first cry." Lila said, "You did not miss your capacity to love." The fountain kept the beat, while the page learned its first word. They met at a legal clinic that smelled like toner and tired hope. Aaron said, "I clerked in family court, and guardianship orders leave footprints." Maya slid the chain log across the desk. Maya said, "It lists a midnight transfer to an address I can't read." Aaron said, "That is a shelter code, not a home." The fluorescent hum sharpened every breath. Maya said, "Someone wrote over my life in codes." Aaron said, "Codes can be translated, and some doors open if you knock right." A copier finished and exhaled. Maya said, "I am afraid of the answer and the wait between now and then." Aaron said, "I will stand in that wait with you." The room felt less narrow. The hospital archives lived 3 floors down, and the elevator sighed like an old lung. A clerk said, "Records after the flood were consolidated, so retrieval is slow." Jonah said, "We'll accept slow if it is honest." Maya pressed her palms to the counter. Maya said, "We need the neonatal transfer ledger from that week." The clerk said, "I see a gap that references external custody." A security guard drifted nearer and pretended not to listen. Maya said, "Who signed the gap?" The clerk said, "Initials look like VH, but the key is off-site." The fluorescent buzz sharpened into anger. Jonah said, "Then we escalate to the custodian of record." The guard cleared his throat and stared at a spot on the wall. Night broke into pieces on the sidewalk outside the archives. Aaron said, "A shelter code like that, maps to Marigold Haven." Maya searched the street for a name she had never spoken. Maya said, "If there was a crib there, then there was a lullaby I never sang." Jonah said, "We follow the ledger, then we find a witness." A bus roared and carried strangers into the wet dark. Aaron said, "There is also a partial record that reads Baby L." The syllable cracked something soft and old. Maya said, "I will not be erased by initials." Rain beaded on her hair and faded to steam. Jonah said, "Tomorrow we knock." The city answered with neon and a dare. Marigold Haven stood with bricks the color of bruised roses. Its sign rusted but defiant. Maya said, "This is where the ledger pointed." Jonah said, "Shelters carry ghosts as much as beds." Aaron pushed open the door that groaned like it remembered. The lobby smelled of bleach and lost shoes. A volunteer said, "Records before the remodel are boxed in storage." Maya said, "Then show me the box that carries my silence." The volunteer hesitated until Aaron said, "Law allows disclosure of intake logs if anonymized." A key scraped a lock and the box came forward, heavier than it should have been. Maya pressed her palm to cardboard and whispered, "You were here once, and I was not." Inside the storage, fluorescent light buzzed like flies. Maya said, "Every box is a grave if you read it wrong." Jonah crouched and tugged at tape. Jonah said, "We'll find your line, and we'll keep it from erasing itself." Aaron flipped through intake cards, each stamped with numbers. Aaron said, "Here. Infant, female, intake date, 12 years ago." Maya froze, her throat tight. She said, "If I touch that paper, I'll be split into before and after." Jonah said, "Then let us touch it together." Aaron laid the card flat like it was a relic. The ink bled faintly where rain once had kissed it. Back at the diner, the rain followed them inside on coats and silence. Maya said, the card said infant female, Baby L. That was her. Jonah stirred his coffee until the spoon rattled. Jonah said, "Then Victor's initials weren't clerical, they were intent." Aaron scanned a photocopy and frowned. Aaron said, "Guardian signed temporary relinquishment, but the foster field is blank." Maya said, "Blank fields hold the biggest truths." The server dropped a slice of pie on the table. a kindness meant for wounds. Jonah said, "We need the guardian to admit it aloud." Maya said, "I will not beg for what was stolen." The neon light flickered like a pulse about to break. Victor's penthouse looked down on the city like judgment carved in glass. He said, "You come here again with accusations, but you will leave with nothing." Maya laid the intake copy across his desk. Maya said, "Your initials signed me out of motherhood." Victor didn't glance down. Victor said, "I signed what protected you from yourself." Jonah stepped forward, voice sharp. Jonah said, "Protection is not theft dressed in a suit." Aaron said, "The law may excuse signatures, but truth makes them guilty." Victor's jaw clenched, his glass of whiskey untouched. Maya said, "I bury no more children in silence." The skyline flared with lightning, cutting across his silence. On the riverbank that night, Maya clutched the intake card copy. She said, "Paper proves a birth, but it doesn't prove a heartbeat now." Jonah said, "Then we chase heartbeat, not paper." Aaron said, "The trail bends to foster homes, and I know where to start." Maya closed her eyes and heard a cry she never heard before. She said, "I want to meet her without drowning her in my sorrow." Jonah said, "You'll meet her as you, not as the wound." Aaron said, "First step is the registry request and I'll file it." The wind lifted the paper like wings. Maya said, "I will not stop, even if it burns me." Family court smelled like wet umbrellas and old grief, and the hallway buzzed with whispering clocks. Maya said, "We file the registry request and the motion to unseal." Jonah said, "We also request expedited review." Aaron said, "I drafted both, we just need stamps." A bailiff eyed their stack like it might bite. Maya said, "Every hour is a room she grows without me." A woman in a navy skirt suit appeared. Marla Keeney said, "I represent Victor Hale, and we oppose ex parte relief." The words chilled the tiles. Jonah said, "Opposition noted, justice still clocks in." Aaron said, "Your client's initials block a mother's truth." Marla said, "My client shielded a vulnerable patient." Maya breathed and said, "Shielding is not erasing," and the clerk's stamp struck like thunder. Lila poured tea that smelled like calm and long trips home. Lila said, "Rage is a fast horse that throws every rider." Maya said, "I need to stay on it until it carries me to her door." Lila said, "Then guide it. Do not let it guide you." Rain braided light across the window. Maya said, "He calls it protection. I call it theft." Lila said, "Name the theft and plan the return, not the fire." Maya stared at her hands and the faint tremor. Maya said, "What if she wants the life she has and not the mother I am?" Lila said, "Hold two truths without breaking." The kettle clicked quiet. Maya said, "Then I choose patience that bites and paper that moves mountains." They found the foster liaison in a strip mall office where Hope wore fluorescent freckles. Elena Ward said, "I can't confirm placements, but I can say what the law already said." Maya said, "Say it like a door opening." Elena said, "Interstate compact, placement finalized, post-adoption contact not recorded." The sentence weighed more than chairs. Jonah said, "Do you have a non-identifying summary?" Elena said, "Hazel eyes, music in the house, a porch with wind chimes." Aaron said, "That narrows a sea to a bay." Maya said, "Tell me a shoreline I can swim to." Elena said, "File your affidavit of interest, then wait for the court to breathe." The printer sighed and delivered a page that trembled in Maya's grip. Victor waited in a boutique cafe where everything whispered about taste. Victor said, "Withdraw your filings, and I will petition to allow a controlled disclosure." Maya said, "I will not trade my voice for your leash." He smiled like frost. Victor said, "The adoptive parents deserve peace, and you invite storms." Jonah said, "Peace is not built with gags." Aaron said, "Your proposal smells like liability control." Victor said, "You mistake prudence for cruelty." Maya said, "I mistake your past for present tense." He leaned in. Victor said, you could lose. And then you will have nothing. Maya said, I already lost, and still I stand. His spoon chimed the cup like a bell for war. The breaking point arrived without trumpet or mercy on a quiet street. Maya said, I called the registry and filed the affidavit, and now the clock owns me. Jonah said, we fill the hours with living, not with drowning. Aaron said, the court set a preliminary date, and will be ready. A wind lifted wrappers like failed kites. Maya said, if the world says no, I will still be her history. Lila's words threaded back through the ache. Maya said, I will hold two truths, and I will not break. Jonah said, then let this hour mark you, not end you. Aaron said, we build the case, and the truth will walk. The traffic light changed, and Maya stepped forward into it. Jonah's living room glowed with laptop light and wind chime audio. Maya said, Elena mentioned music and a porch, so we hunt porches with storms in them. Aaron said, community boards leave breadcrumbs when no one looks. The video showed a schoolyard, a weathered porch, and copper chimes that flickered. A girl tuned a violin, while rain stitched silver lines across the frame. Maya said, if this is coincidence, why does my chest know the melody? Jonah said, freeze the frame and pull the street sign at the corner. Aaron said, Magnolia and Fifth, recital link posted by Marla K.I. Maya said, her name is printed, and my life sits in the margins. Jonah said, we do not knock tonight, we plan and protect what is fragile. Aaron said, I can nap custody filings against this name by morning. The chimes rang again, and every note felt like a door half open. Lila closed the office door and stood for a long breath before speaking. Lila said, I know the name in your screenshot, and I should have told you earlier. Maya felt the floor edge tilt, but held her ground. Lila said, Marla Keene is the adoptive mother, and I once counseled their family. Maya said, you sat with me while I clawed at fog, and you knew the shoreline. Lila said, confidentiality chained me, and I sinned by silence when you needed warning. Thunder rolled like furniture down a hallway. Maya said, does she love the child or guard a victory? Lila said, she loves fiercely, and fear has teeth when love is at stake. Maya said, then this fight is a house with two hearts and no doors. Lila said, hold your truth clean, and let the court open the door we cannot. The teacup rattled once and went still, while the room remembered its duty. The courthouse steps glistened, and Marla arrived with a bag that looked like armor. Marla said, you found what you were always going to find, and now we speak plainly. Maya said, plain as a child who breathes without my name in her lungs. Marla said, she breathes because surgeries found her in time, and because stability held. Jonah said, stability is not a synonym for secrecy. Aaron said, your conflict of interest will interest a judge more than your bag. Marla said, I was not counseled then, I became family, and the court blessed the adoption. Maya said, what does she call the wind when it chimes? Marla said, she calls it Sunday, and she plays violin on the porch after rain. Maya said, I will not rip her life, but I will not be erased from it. Marla said, then bring a request, not a wrecking ball, and we may all stand upright. The flag snapped above them like a warning and a prayer stitched together. Victor met them in the hospital garage where rain threaded through sodium light. Victor said, you want your monster to confess, and I will confess the parts that fit. Maya said, start with the night you turned a cradle into paper. Victor said, you were unconscious, bleeding, and the NICU called for an emergency transfer. Victor said no parent of record had authority, and the guardian ad litem was unreachable. Victor said, I signed a temporary order so the infant could leave for surgery out of state. Jonah said, temporary is not 12 years of silence. Aaron said, you sealed records beyond necessity and called it prudence. Victor said, the receiving family wanted privacy, and fear did the rest of the work. Maya said, fear wrote my history, and you held the pen when I could not speak. Victor said, if you must hate me, hate me for the choice that saved breath and stole names. A siren wound upward, while rain drummed verdicts on the hood of a parked car. Night folded around Maya's apartment, and the window held the city like a dim confession. Maya said, I will ask for contact that honors her life and restores my name to mine. Jonah said, we build a bridge, not a siege tower. Aaron said, I will file for mediated disclosure and a meeting plan that protects her. Maya said, I will bring letters that carry light and not my storms. The printer sang a thin song while papers stacked like patient bones. Maya said, if they call me stranger, I will answer mother and stand still. Jonah said, you have learned to hold two truths without breaking. Aaron said, Act 6 is not mercy, it is courage with rules. Maya said, then we meet their fear with care and our care with proof. A streetcar rang its bell as if to mark the hour when turning became promise. I said we'll see you. The room felt wide enough for hope and small enough to keep them close. The courtroom air felt heavy, wood polished to a shine that reflected nothing but silence. Maya said, I file this motion for mediated disclosure and request direct contact. Marla sat opposite, eyes steady but shadowed. Marla said, we do not oppose limited mediation, but we demand structure. Victor's presence was a cold monument at her side. Victor said, my actions saved a child, even if they wounded a mother. Jonas said, no child's safety required silencing a woman's name. Aaron said, the statute allows contact under court review, and precedent holds here. The judge leaned forward, gavel not yet lifted. The world seemed to pause, waiting for a verdict carved in breath instead of wood. The judge's chambers held books older than the pain in the room. The judge said, this matter is no longer shadow but petitioned light. Maya said, I seek to honor her life, not tear it apart. Marla said, then we ask that her heart be guarded, for her age requires gentleness. Aaron said, the law provides room for cautious bridges. Jonah said, caution is not silence, it is measured care. Victor leaned back and muttered, history paints monsters where necessity stood. The judge said, history is painted in voices, silenced, and voices restored. Maya said, my voice has waited 12 years for a name that belongs to me. The clock ticked loudly, carrying all the weight of 12 winters. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like bees tasting the storm. One shouted, are you the biological mother? Maya said, I am the mother who was never given her child's breath. Marla said, this is not a trial of worth, but of process. Victor scowled at the cameras, shoulders braced. Jonah said, let's move before sound bites replace truth. Aaron said, every word here shapes tomorrow's docket. Maya said, if I am reduced to headlines, let the headline be truth. The flashes cut like lightning, and for a second her face looked carved into stone. Marla whispered, you will not win sympathy with defiance. Maya whispered back, sympathy is not my ask. Justice is. The crowd buzzed, restless and ravenous. Night at Jonah's apartment was quiet, except for rain stitching the balcony rail. Maya said, her name is almost within reach, but what if I break her world with mine? Jonah said, worlds bend more than they break if love leads the bend. Aaron typed, the screen glowing on legal language. Aaron said, the mediated contact proposal includes her age, her voice, her choice. Maya said choice, the one thing I never had. Jonah said, now you build choice for her instead. Maya pressed her palms together until they hurt. She said, if she says no, I will still stand in her light. Aaron said, the law cannot force love, but it can carve room for truth. Rain hit the glass harder, drumming like a second heartbeat. The preliminary hearing reconvened, and tension crackled like a storm unbroken. The judge said, the court will allow structured mediated contact, with conditions to protect the child. Maya said, I accept these terms with open hands, not claws. Marla said, then we will step carefully, but we will step. Victor muttered, history may call me thief, but it cannot call me coward. Jonah said, history calls you both, unless you choose otherwise. Aaron said, the next stage is drafting a meeting plan with timing and scope. Maya said, I dreamed of her face with no features. Soon I may see her eyes. The gavel came down once, hard as thunder, soft as mercy. The room exhaled, and Maya's breath finally found its way out. The mediation room faced a pale courtyard, and the blinds whispered with the vent's breath. The mediator said, ground rules are care, pace, and consent, nothing rushed. Maya said, I asked to meet her on ground that holds care, not claim. Marla said, fear stands in my doorway, but I will not lock it. The mediator said, we can begin with letters read together in this room. Maya said, I wrote about the lullabies I never sang, and the promise to listen. Marla said, she plays violin when it rains, and she names songs after small joys. Maya said, is one called Sunday, with a note that wobbles and then steadies. Marla said, yes, and she laughs at the wobble every time. The mediator said, then our next step is a brief supported meeting. Maya said, I will bring a voice that fits her size and leaves her air. The community center room had paper stars and a rug that remembered birthday crumbs. The mediator said, you may sit, and she will enter with me. Maya said, I will start with thank you, and then I will listen. Marla nodded and breathed like she was counting anchors. The door opened, and a girl held a violin like a small boat. Maya said, thank you for meeting me and for the music that travels this far. The girl said, I only know 3 songs, and one is Sunday. Marla said, play the one you like best, not the one we expect. The bow found a note that trembled, then stood up straight. Maya said, that wobble is brave, and I am learning it too. The room felt as wide as a porch, and as close as a hand. After the meeting, the hallway smelled like crayons and rain-dried coats. Victor waited near a vending machine as if it might absolve him. Victor said, I signed an affidavit that releases the key in the context. Maya said, keys do not heal, but they unlock the room where healing sits. Victor said, I was necessary, and I was cruel, and both can be true. Jonah said, be useful now, and stop narrating your virtue. Aaron said, deliver the records and step back from the frame. Victor handed a slim envelope that sounded heavier than it should. Victor said, there were complications, and I feared the cliff more than the climb. Maya said, fear is not a compass, and I will not follow it. The machine hummed, and a red light blinked like a tired apology. Lila's office held the dusk like a careful bowl. Lila said, tell me the smallest true thing that happened today. Maya said, a note trembled, and she laughed, and I did not break. Lila said, that is a door more than a sound. Maya said, Victor handed records and admitted both necessity and harm. Lila said, ambivalence is honest, and honesty can be a suture. Maya said, Marla held the room without pushing me out of it. Lila said, 2 mothers can hold one sky if they stop tearing it. Maya said, I will not name a victory that costs the child her quiet. Lila said, then you are already learning the shape of peace. The kettle clicked, and the room released a small, warm breath. Evening settled on Magnolia Street, and wind chimes counted breaths between notes. Maya stood beyond the gate and left a letter inside the box. Maya said, I will be here on the days that suit your heart, and quiet when it doesn't. On the porch, a violin found Sunday and let it wander. Marla watched from the doorway, not guarding, just guarding space. The girl waved once, a small arc that felt like a sunrise. Maya said, I will learn the wobble until it steadies, and I will not rush the steadiness. The sky held the last blue like a secret shared. Jonah's text arrived, and it read, home when you're ready, bridge by bridge. Maya said, I am ready to meet what could have been as what is. The chimes agreed and kept the measure.